All right. So we'll start with a praise to Manjushri. It's here. Good morning. Thanks to my guru and protector Manjushri, who holds in his heart the scriptural texts and bodies of the things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, who teaches in 60 ways. All creatures caught in the praises of the sun. And frees us from the iron chains of Akama, whose powerful sword of wisdom hews our sufferings wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance. I entreat you, Manjushri of princely bodies, endowed with 112 marks of the Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages of perfection of the Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. O Manjushri, O loving love, with the brilliance of wisdom, illuminate the darkness of rising love into the voice of words and the text that explain them.
Sanji Chadan Soji Jananga Chacha Badu Dami Tavsuji Dami Shiki Sonu Drolam Benshi Sanji Drupara Shu Sanji Chadan Soji Jananga Chacha Badu Dami Tavsuji Dagi Chishi Sonu Drolam Benshi Sanji Drupara Shu Sanji Chadan Soji Jananga Chacha Badu Dami Tavsuji Dagi Chishi Sonu Drolam Benshi Sanji Drupara Shu Kangi tuzi ni suni tawa tamche pambi chere tambi chuni tenze kodam tela changse lo. Good morning, everyone. Samudira. Nivarani de chivi shaman de kyu. Moye ye chamron shi. Rani chidaki on de kyu lelo mecha. Iwa chivi kewa bela. Chivi zi lelo panga. Lelo panga. Himayi bata. Devi le marcheba. Lelo chivi lelo mecha.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to continue with the 7th chapter in Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva of Life, the chapter that teaches joyous effort or enthusiastic diligence. First off, let's look at where we are at the text. We're not here, sorry. We are somewhere here. So, we are looking at abandoning the laziness that relishes the taste of idleness. We began with how to abandon these types of laziness. And today we're going to pick up from point B. It belongs to the section of abandoning laziness by reflecting on the disadvantages of it in this life. And point B comes under the heading of as even you yourself are under the dominion of death, it is inappropriate to carry on as if you had time. There are 4 points to that section. It says, as you yourself are under the dominion of the Lord of death, you should not be lazy. Then as death will come swiftly, make perseverance and virtue. The time of death is no time to abandon laziness. That's the third point. And the last one is, as death will come suddenly without your having been able to do all that you want, you should not be lazy. Let's begin with verse 6 that comes under the heading of, as you yourself are under the dominion of the Lord of death, you should not be lazy.
데려다 저당 디지 현만체다 싱그레 왔으면 간주 추치야기 추치야기 시자로디 투사디 먼저 semgamle 투기어라스라 semgamle 투기어가 이페세고 간스나 semgam 그러던디 먼저 란신 팅기 semgam 그러던디 and they were the Dungam Devati once mid some Mayba and the George took shed the Samalok Kanji Sem Dingi Socha Yoto Cholia and they were Devatan Dungam Debi and Ranjin Dingi Sem Yobadi Sivu Rogeres. The dish shall Tony and the Chulu Mundantia. 수수수게 출루 만들어 용당디야 소디 대원 대버당 동문 대버 시샤니 대원 대위에서 대원 접당 탑람디 탑람직 돈 아니 최신디 총샤오지 동아 세위기 탑지래야 최신 다상 딘디지 차고레스라
We all know, we all recognize that the practice of the Buddha Dhamma is done on the basis of our mind. And when we start to look at the way that the mind functions, mind and emotions and so forth, we recognize that all of us, to begin with, are seeking happiness, and no living being wants to suffer. It's not only us as human beings, but we can see when we look at other living beings that all the beings within the six realms of existence naturally or innately have that basic wish to be happy or to be well and not to experience pain and suffering. And on that basis, different spiritual traditions have evolved throughout the time. Different religions, different spiritual traditions that teach techniques how to accomplish what we want, how to accomplish the happiness and well-being that we seek, and how to alleviate suffering and pain. So there are various techniques that different traditions teach, as well as here in this tradition, we're looking at ways of accomplishing the happiness and well-being that we seek and eliminates suffering.
Tinza da dugi devalya ni gore min dugi dungalya ni lude de semde lu dunga de sem dunga ni yobadi pesivros tinza da lu dunga di bigita sujing dunga lu devadya and sujing devasorach kanji and sulat tembi devach dinza di and penatang longe pi penjola soba tan chi tungi mamujoras dindi pen men la soba ro dindi tonta lu dunga sego chi yumudas the same dunga di tetsangi same dunga setu yores zawani same dunga setu mudas ro tumutu di same dunga seji tab di semjil ten sego yonza lojon di riti so songoya di dindi jireshas ro.
And since we're using the words for happiness and suffering, we can also recognize that there are two levels to the experience of happiness and suffering, or pleasure and pain. This is what we experience on the physical level and what we experience on the mental level. So physically, we have happiness or pleasure, comfort, well-being. Mentally, we have also happiness and well-being. And likewise, physically, we can look at suffering, pain, discomfort, displeasure, and so forth, as well as those experiences on the mental level. So then in terms of the pleasure, for example, that we experience on a physical level, the one that we experience on a physical level is related to physical things, in a sense that it depends upon physical things we can experience pleasure. Like, for example, it depends upon the conditions that we experience. It depends upon food. It depends upon medicine. A certain physical sensation of either happiness or well-being is developed. But just limiting our experience to what we experience on a physical level is not going to cut it. It's not enough, because we can recognize that though some levels of pleasure or pain that you can deal with on a physical level, still it doesn't necessarily eliminate all the pain that you experience on a mental level. You might have good conditions, food, medicine, and so forth physically. It doesn't mean to say that mentally you'd be able to eliminate mental unhappiness. Mental unhappiness or suffering can be eliminated on a mental level rather than trying to address that only on a physical level. Mental unhappiness or mental suffering needs to be dealt with the mind itself.
These nganzu shuk chejondo jiki jitsek doni keji shebana ani sem gi dunga dang lu dunga nidi sem gi dunga shuk che yobati pesi uyoresra anzu lu gi deki ki ani chage 상고야 상마이는데요. 아니 셈레야 아니 디기 메바다 셈 심벌로 서버 촌나 아니 디기 아니 류 디기 기 튕긴 디기 간주 철투무다스 다 셈레야 데바여바이나 류 가주스 까두 뇽고 촌나야 아니 케투고레스 네투고레스라
We can also recognize how, on a mental level, the type of experiences that we have are much more significant, much more powerful than the ones that we experience on a physical level. So, for example, physically, it might be the case that everything works well for you. You have all the conducive conditions externally that contribute to physical pleasure or comfort or well-being, and yet, if your mind is unhappy, that mental unhappiness overrides or is much more significant than what you experience on a physical level. So if your mind is unhappy, it doesn't matter if you have good conditions, supportive conditions, your mind is still unhappy. Whereas it might be that physically your living conditions are meager, or you don't have very good supportive conditions, and yet with a stable and solid or happy state of mind, it doesn't really matter what happens externally. Mentally, you can still sustain a level of happiness and well-being. So looking at this combination of physical and mental, and which one is more significant, we can recognize that mental happiness and well-being is much more significant than what happens on a physical level.
Tinza manzulo di kishamu shoch se goyadi pigile ziwa zamayin ba tengu ne soleya ngaran soleya kishamu shoch chade yenza an kishamu chin hung kiwe tamu zu songdo asra ina yanta ngamzu mashibi onki ra pena ani dunga yongyadi lu ki sem dunga yongyadi kenza zu di sanji chonde di sondi pigi mari balaya mishibi wangi ani chabaki tiwangi danki shedanki ani lesa o tindili teni dunga yungdus somanan shingi mishibi tsawala teni mombi tsawala teni ani nganzu pigi dunga mong chingonza ta momba seyak ra momba seyak tabdi ta nangju nang ta zu pigi ta chi Lanentayandi tabdireshas ra.
So from that perspective, the practice of mind training, or lojon in Tibetan, for us becomes paramount. It becomes so important. It is not that we just consider it to be important. When you look at reality, how we react to certain situations, you can recognize the importance of the practice of mind training. This is what the great masters of the past have emphasized. So then, when we look at how do we relate to that, we can see some lack of understanding that we have with respect to the importance of training our mind. And particularly when you look at that from the viewpoint of the stages by which our mind is made unhappy, from a Buddhist perspective, we recognize that the very basis for mental unhappiness begins with ignorance, a lack of understanding or lack of knowledge. So this ignorance, this confusion is the basis for attachment. And then on that basis, anger or hostility arise. We take actions motivated by those afflictive states of mind, which result in suffering. So it all begins, it all done on the basis of not understanding, not knowing, confusion, or ignorance. So what we deal with in the Buddha Dhamma is that level. What we're trying to undo is that lack of understanding, to eliminate our lack of understanding, to eliminate the ignorance or the confusion with respect to the way that things are.
Dinza Karsavarda Rangla Nebigi Chavalaya, Jugati, Rangla Nebigi Chavalaya, Jugati, Lelo Reshas, the Yabumandos. Anichi ni Tukmar, ni Shingmar, Samyaki, Susuma, Pachaya Tian, and Lelo Reshas. Su Jamba Inia, and Mishibi Mumba di Su Jamba Inia, and Korang Ranshin Korang, say Yoba. Doya Yavanza, Su Jambainia, said to Gajeres. They were singing the Su Drubainia, Drub to Genza, and Nitu Mari, Ninjung Mari Sambigi, Susosulaya, Pachayadi, non true racial, Nello racials, changing mundos, so Dindrich Sungodas.
So then in terms of those things which are harmful to oneself, activities that are harmful to oneself, laziness is one of them. And this is the point that we're now covering in the text, the detrimental effects of laziness. One type of laziness from a Buddhist perspective is laziness of discouragement, in which you look down on your own abilities and you think that I cannot do it. This is something that is beyond my ability. I will never be able to do that. So undermining our own abilities is called laziness from a Buddhist perspective. So first off, we do have the ability to take up training in order to overcome confusion, to overcome ignorance. We can develop better understanding of reality and thereby overcome ignorance. We can also cultivate happiness. We can cultivate the cause of happiness. We have the ability to do that. So if we take up the training, if we take up those and practice them, we can eliminate lack of understandings with respect to the way that things are. And we can also develop a greater and greater degree of happiness and well-being. So not doing that, because, for example, we undermine our own abilities. We think that this is something that I cannot do. This is beyond my ability. I will not understand that, and so forth. This way of discouraging ourselves is called laziness.
Magic certain Pigilia, Shasaji, Dilende Travis, Maimba, Moya Nitsu egg, Moya Nitsu Janjinza, Moya Nitsu any Lojum Chavianza, and Delayan Jugman Devadi, Lelo Reshas. Moya Nitsu Shingoras, Moya Nitsu Mashibaina, and Moya Casa Kanji Moya Nitsu Mashibaina, and Demba that Tangu said the Tolaya, Drutu Maros.
You might have the idea that to practice something like that is to practice a certain cultural tradition. But it's not that we're taking up here Buddhist culture. What we're taking up is the study of reality, the study of the way that things exist in an actual sense. So not attempting to develop an insight into reality is what we call here laziness. So we take up the study of the way that things are because we don't understand that. And if we don't understand the way that things are, if we don't understand reality, how can we act in a way that is truthful or in a way that accords with reality? So Geshe is holding a piece of paper in his hand, and it has a small insect on it. Can you see it? I can't see it.
Yeah. Oh, the yug there, the David the Jugor, the Strajacha Jatamba. Call Deva Guyanza, Duman Duminza, Kuninjiko, Jugor,
So there was a small insect on the paper that Geshe was holding, and you can see it moving around or trying to walk away, to run away. You can see that there's also an activity that is motivated by the wish to be protected from suffering, the wish to be safe, to not experience suffering and pain, the wish to be well. Even with insects, when you look at the way that they behave, you can say that that is a sign of that basic wish to be well and to be protected.
Oh, did it? That Dinza Sangi, the dig Businchin Sunjelaya, and Rangshin Dingilia, Devan Devatan, Dungamundi, Song Yavach. And Devan and Pigi, that Dunga Sevi, and Tigi Castle, Tigi Sem, and Sem di Dungatan, Tarun Yavach, Taji Yavach. Song Yores, Nitsamayimba, Busin Chin Didawajin by Nia, and it could sempi, Piki Chadam Monsomda, Taron Imbach, Song Yores.
So from a Buddhist perspective, all living beings, even small insects, have that basic wish to avoid suffering and to be well. Even small living beings or other living beings have that way of thinking that considers happiness and well-being or pain and suffering and so forth. And also we recognize that in relation to the mind, we have the ability, the suitability of eliminating suffering. We can be free from suffering. Not only we have that potential, that ability to be free from suffering, also other living beings that have minds, they also have the suitability of freedom from suffering.
There is the Nanzuta means me Tenji, me Luj Lenza, and Socha Shanda Mandravata, and Lu Korang Togi, Nanzulea, and Namja Mandach, Lenin number GB, Jet Tuyagi, Namjuch, Levach, Segata Tindi, and Levach Yuenza, D Nanzu Peju Machichin, and the Trolla Dravina, and Trolla Reshas, T Peju Chini, and Susu Deva. Ani Shen Deva, Ranshi Nika Deva Tuyagi, Namju Tizat Tuyag Cheduda, Ani Dembani, Dembashi, Ani Dejimata Chudru the Soba, Muyu Nizuson Deati, and Namju Payachet, Namju Payachet, Tiredos, Ra.
So in this life, we were born as human beings. And as we've taken a body of a human being, we have the ability to use a greater degree of wisdom, to develop our wisdom, our intelligence, to distinguish between what is good and what is bad. We have the ability to use the mind. It depends upon this physical body that we have. It depends upon, for example, the brain that we have. So let's not put it to waste, rather than wasting the potential that we have in this life for developing a greater wisdom, a greater intelligence that can make such distinctions. We can put it to use to develop a greater degree of happiness and well-being for our sake, as well as for the sake of others living beings, other sentient beings. And we can develop our wisdom through studying topics such as the two truths, the four truths, the 16 aspects of the four truths, such as the aspect of impermanence. So we can look into those topics in order to increase our wisdom, to develop our intelligence.
Quando the something is of the chasa, then deep bridge does ra. Deep body, which
Oh.
the mold the shans a good that science point your some Lego rasta. In a mold how did all drawn the question to single maras. The moon be one mold how the Germany and could don't bashi. She was one that the was ra.
So there's that insect is still there somewhere. So it's now on Geshe's saucer. So Geshe reckons that it's there because also might kind of think that there is some food or sustenance that it can find, not knowing that if Geshe will place the hot cup on the saucer, it can kill the bag, right? So that's an example of like lack of knowledge or misunderstanding.
The Nanzu, yeah, Nanzu done dinner soin on Shingi. The Nanzu talk about tempo dodge, huge. Zindig your day, one sometime, Tapa tempo, so in the meba. And the indigenous raw Chidaki, Shawan to cure the yoba, Chidaki, Shawan to cure the yoba, Kanjing Nanzu Gilea, any Shogi Alan, Gonda Mani but the chick, any curry took but the man chevadi, Nanzu chiwi Gangela, draw mato, Nanzu soon be gain chayadi, Pemas of a new redos, raw.
So then looking at the misunderstandings that we have with respect to ourselves, we have this misunderstanding with respect to ourselves that conceives of ourselves as if we are permanent, as if there's something enduring in our existence, as if there is some sense of stability in our existence. We don't see how we are under the dominion of the Lord of Death. This is to say that when we look at the different things that occur to us from morning to evening, we can recognize how there are so many conditions that can accelerate that death and so few conditions that keep us alive.
Yeah, the lawyer has leondi. Any when the color roji, Chitan also color di Devu Yong Yadan. Any sombu near each other, color sagoros, Inia, Yas Leon, the color Karseva in ya. Montrich, Nungi Gangan, or Dilichagados. The kanji and D Chigilia Drudas, Kala in a Chivigan and Dredge.
And we can see how as we grow older and older, when we reach a certain stage in our life where we're growing older and older, we can see how things become even to a greater degree not conducive to us, even as far as, for example, food. So food is supposed to nourish us, to keep us well, to keep us alive. But then as you grow older, you find that some types of food that you were able to ingest before suddenly become things that do not agree with you. Even those things that were supposed to keep you alive, to contribute to your well-being, they're no longer conducive to your well-being.
Or did it? These are done on the any twinking curry of an penam, that pesha yobina, motor yobina, the curry yobina, chita, and mimanchia, pig, touching, and sasanjin dogoras, satan in a yobina, and sosu chiwi kena and drodding it. Zakdoyoras, ra.
And looking at the conditions, living conditions that we experience at this day and age. So we use technology, we use cars to commute to different places. When we look at the relationships that we have, even as a couple relationship, going around, to visit different places and so forth, we experience even more conditions that can cause our death.
Special ten so shodrongi, Zambali Namalia, Manshuda in a kanji, Pemambu yoros, ra, and a moda pilia teni, and a so shodrongi, Kambala ten so shodrongi, kanji, and so shoyag, kendi, di show mari, di show research, Zawanin on the pigi, and Kazuchan love to get Mudos.
So when we look at the different things that we engage with, like, for example, some people lose their life in the pursuit of money. Some people lose their life in a car accident. Some people lose their life in relation to the dwelling or the house. To the point where when you look at your environment and you look at the different things that you engage with, you cannot really say that I will not die in this situation. I will not die in this circumstance. I will not die in this place.
dinza nganzuta chida ki shamon jiyo ba chiwa ngiba yimba di yachi gyatang ba inza ta chiwi kawle ya anda nganzu tandi ji ngamra yo ba tele ta ji kaza shiwa nan ji tele ta ngamra an dindi yingu yanza ta ngamra tuzu mayong ya ta har yang nganzu kyewa ji len ju ba kawle ya ji ani tanda nan shin ta mulu senden ji le ya kyewa ya go ji le ya 아니 레야기 아니 딘지기 탑실이야 단단히 아니 먼저 자리 치고야지 라 단단 자리 치투고 요인자 치투고 가야 자리 치고야지 제 무등이 단지 때문에 난신기 무슨 로지네 깨월랜데요나 콜레야 치 카다 문도 왔어 나서 딘지 많이 봐 먼저래 남치 때나 때야 니바이 가야 당한주 맞던 데바이나 안 가지 마해를 찍었어야 하는지 and hundreds of what chat with us.
So in this section in the text, we're contemplating how we are still under the dominion of the Lord of Death in order to incite some fear in our mind. And the type of fear that we develop in our mind is related to what will occur to us upon death and the transference to next life. There's something that we can do in order to make sure that in our next life, our next rebirth, we once again are born in a good situation, with a good body, such as, for example, the body of a human being. If we are born in other states of existence, like, for example, how would it be like for us to be born as an insect, not being able to do anything, not being able to do anything with regards to, for example, eliminating suffering and so forth. So considering that, then we think that at a time in which I'm still alive, at a time in which there's something that I can do, that I can do, I want to make sure that I do it to my best ability. And this is the type of contemplation that we take up here.
Lo chogosala ya machowa no lelo res dibjigi lelo machawa ani zabe na lamne konne kanu su chidaki ne tashin ju chidar kyonne sagashi dedel ilo chidar gas.
And this is the point that we're going to pick up today. So we're looking at verse 6 that comes under the heading as you yourself are under the dominion of the Lord of Death, you should not be lazy. So when you recognize that you're still under the control of conditions that can contribute to death, in that sense we're under the dominion of the Lord of Death, then there's some mental attitudes that we can take to deal with that situation. If we do not do that, as the text says, we are lazy. So we shouldn't be lazy. So verse number 6, let's look at this verse. It says, while the Lord of Death is looking, having blocked off every route, how can you enjoy eating? And thus, how can you enjoy sleep? It's just like we have said before when we've covered the previous verse. It would be just like a buffalo that is taking it easy, still nibbling on grass while he sees the butcher working on other buffalo. So don't behave like that. Geshe Rinpoche's commentary to verse 6 says, the butcher that is the Lord of Death has closed off all roads leading to the deathless city and has already cast his eyes on us. How can you be careless like the buffalo and enjoy eating food or crave for sleep? This carelessness is unsuitable.
Sem chadam mosong shaman kurde yunza ani kenchila rang yo mares sem chadam mosong shaman kurde yukala ya pigi ani kewa jiwa jawundi ani kewa jimi gi lu lenya di ani lu lenji gi yu zo de chadang ton da lu lengi yunza ani chadang gi wang gi chongwi gi lu di and dungar race, dungar bashi race, and dela tembigi, dela tindi luji yotsa jelaya, tig dunga tenchi and dunga dimucha the young dage. Things that tig saw chadang di and seba chivana, chadang go chetubana, and chadang la tembigi, ludi young mares. Things that dimandi and give a jiva di never chadogores.
So currently we're still under the control of conditions for death. We have no freedom, we have no control. And when we say that we have no freedom, we have no control, what we mean to say is that we're under the control of anger, attachment, and ignorance, these poisonous afflictions. We're under the control of those afflictive states of mind, and because of anger and attachment, we are compelled to take another rebirth. And as we take another rebirth, we take a rebirth in the process in which we acquire a body. So you can say that our body is conditioned by anger and attachment. And as such, the very foundation that we have, this body, is a body that is called a body of suffering, an aggregate of suffering. In a sense that so long as we have a body such as this, which we acquired in a process that was controlled by anger, attachment, and so forth, for that long, we'll still continue to experience a stream of events in which we experience suffering, pain, discomfort, and so forth. There's no avoiding it because of the process by which we've acquired this body. But there is a way of eliminating anger and attachment and so forth. And if we eliminate anger, attachment, and the like, we will also at the end come to eliminate suffering, in that we will eliminate the process in which we are compelled to again and again to take a body such as this, which is a body in the nature of suffering. So if we eliminate the process by which we are compelled to do it, we will no longer experience those sufferings attributed to a body such as this.
Dinza Kazanda Chadang di Nandu Sem Chadang the Taroin Badi Sangi Rigton, Nandu Sem di Sem Giranjan Vesawa, Chimalu was a Chadang Lodi, and came lower Togi, and young de Amatobi, di and Sem Giranjan Baji Chayo Mares or Dison Yoresra. That di is the Chakpuraj the Yordin, Titole. This John to buy not Yatam Susu Samlaya and the chick Semshuki as the lot of Gianchi, tending young.
We say that we have a Buddha nature, in that the nature of the mind is luminosity, and the stains in the mind are adventitious. Anger, attachment, and so forth are adventitious. They are not ingrained within the nature of the mind. The nature of the mind is luminous. So it is a complicated topic. It is a complicated topic, but if we study this topic, Buddha nature, looking at the nature of our own mind, the clear-like nature of the mind, and understand how stains are adventitious, we will develop courage and determination in knowing that there is something that can be done.
Tima Lua said, Pena, Dajasana Dimula Sovadi, and Lua Imbadi, so khani dugu islamdi and chakdangi pena mari wala soba dechala soba digi same digi lo sema mares lo shinju logires lo shinju lojinza ani di ani sebigi nimbu yores kanzana ko shinju lojinza ko dan zandan musun gavigi ani lo digi togi ani ko sedredi uyende to chagores ro.
So we said that stains are adventitious. Anger, attachment, ignorance, those stains are adventitious. How do we prove that those stains in our mind are adventitious? Well, when we look at those states of mind, anger, attachment, and ignorance, we can see that they are not valid cognitions, they are erroneous states of mind. And if they are erroneous states of mind, there is an antidote that will be completely contrary to them in its mode of apprehension. So if you develop an antidote that is opposite in its mode of apprehension to ignorance, to anger, to attachment, and so forth, you'll be able to eliminate them, and therefore they are adventitious.
Terdan nipa new chivi gewalan bebanes. New chivi gewalan bebas launi. Nanzo chi tanga tuju ye samsam. Nango chunju ye. Tanga tuju ye samsam. Nga neba me. And tanda nga shig marisam bige. Tanga nanzo samla ya. Samlo jaras. Ta di jasha jatamba. Tembu yo mares. Ra. Tembu yo mares. And ni ko injimi nanzo so trouble ya. And natse nami. So trogomundas, and Gengochan so trogomundas, and Tanan giving Puguinia, and there is so short the Yungudas, Tinza, and Nanzu Chia delia, Tuzza in Yoman, and New Chuanza, Tadani, and Gava Dubalaya, and Devachi.
So we've covered verse number 6. Let's look at verse number 7, which comes out of the heading of, or the first part of verse 7 that comes out of the heading as death will come swiftly, make perseverance in virtue. So you might be thinking that, yeah, I will die, but I still have time. I'm still young. I'm not old. I'm not sick. So death will not come quickly. So you shouldn't be thinking like that, because it is not that only when you get old you will die, or only if you will get sick you will die. It is not impossible for someone to die when they're young, at the prime of their youth. Death can occur swiftly, and therefore it says here, don't act as if you still have time. So then in looking at how, because of that, one should make effort in virtue, it says in the next couple of lines in verse number 7, for as long as death is quickly approaching, then I shall accumulate the collections.
That the delia that chiva yung chogros, and it you a chiva in baina, and penata divo matches, give a chegores. That Gunsen Harris Lagros, give a chigo, that new a chiva, the new a ching, chiva nearby in baina, and give a chigo with Gunsen Harris. The deep chiva deep young gogros.
Now, in reading through this passage, you might have some questions or queries arising in your mind. It says here that since death is swiftly approaching, you should make effort in virtue. Why should we make effort in virtue, in the cultivation of virtue, in light of death quickly approaching? What's the reason for stating that?
The Gilzen di Disungores, Pena, Tanganzu Chikan Hamalaya, and Peggy Amjigita Kara Chuzakashima, Digma into Lavina, the Samlaya, the Nambra Ligros, Chiki Pamaina, the Jidan the Onima Tungure, Chiki Pamaina, Suzi, and Chik Tobotomo in a re, Samalota, Chik, Tapsi Kaimake, Kanale Benjo Kazusia by Naya, and Peggy, Job Tuyagi, Tapsio Maros, that Dinti Kalaya, and Chik gave us Sasha Giovanna, 소수기 개월 주샤와 저거나 갑투디 팽 통이 시바디 개월 디차고를 모두 젠캬랑 메시지 나오려야 가리 주요 바이냐 가리 싸요 바이냐 지가나물이야 그냥 셈이야 팽 말했어 아니 친니 개월 치마나야 그냥 팽디 싸제비 개월 디 팽그를 모두 아니 셴바 강기장 아니 개월 치마나야 그냥 팽도 매방서 개월 주고를 세디 소디 돈 순고레스.
The reason for saying that because death is swiftly approaching, you should cultivate virtue is that when we imagine a situation, for example, in which we are on the verge of death. So imagine that situation where the doctor tells you that you have just a few more hours to live. And you are surrounded by those who are dear to your heart. Might be your parents, your friends, other family members, and so forth. You might have possessions and money that you have accumulated throughout your life, but when you're told that you have just a few hours to live, none of them will be of help. None of them would be of help in the sense that even if you've accumulated a lot of possessions and money, it will not help you to avoid your upcoming death. So in that sense, since death cannot be avoided and all the other things that you've accumulated in this life will be of no avail, the only thing that could be of help are the virtues that you have accumulated, in the sense that when you think of the things that you can take with you from this lifetime to the next life in the transference of life and death, the things that will continue with you are the virtues that you have created. Your money, possessions, and all the rest of things that you've accumulated in this life, none of them will continue with you. All of those things will be left behind. So then, looking at Gyata Dhammarincha's commentary to this section, it begins with an argument. I still have some leisure. The answer is one is certainly going to die soon, and hence one should build up to the two accumulations as long as one is not captured by the Lord of Death.
Sumba chivitse lelo pawan timaimbanis. Chivala mundu chobitse tachi and subodan and chig Sambadia, Tembadia, Sibumeva, the Dimdichi Kaudulaya, Tachi, that Lelo Panshin, that Giochi in Slavina, that Lunga Yisumgi, Doctor the Chansa, Nyamsar was. Nyamsar Sambala, Anichi, Pentongi Shivagi, Nuba the Dembi, Giochi, Drutu Marwas, Drumatudi, and Karan, and the Jil Tesaris, Chitaris, to mind the Chasaris.
Next point that covers the last two lines in verse 7 says the time of death is no time to abandon laziness, in a sense that you might be thinking that I understand what you've said, but I will practice the Dhamma at the end of my life. Later on, when I'll get old, when I get sick and so forth, that will be the time in which I will put it into practice. Here Shantideva says too late. At the time in which that will happen, your mind will already be to some degree obscured, to some degree confused. There would be unclarity and also a lack of strength and power that you'd be able to wield in order to put it into practice. So if you think, I will do it later, when I go through the process of dying, it is too late. That's not the time to practice. So let's look at these two lines. It says, even if I were to abandon laziness then, at that improper time, what will be the use?
Terida dinza chetangi lobjong khari bainaya, lobjong khari bainaya, suzu loshun bikabdulaya, jang tuwaina, jang by na jang to dos and the key regimen lo shimikal jang by na and lamsan sing dos lo ya lesana sing dos ra but din na shingi nanzu chödi chögi nyamne dia and lo shimikal do ya lu semiga tarbi kaldular ro hagdun dichi 원봉나 다른 갑도들이야 아니 최장 투바이나 아니 최디 가서 다지 춤제 담바치 장투 그레스 간지 장투 그레스 다 로야스렌 당이 로십중갑 주주든지를 아니 나 타와치 아니치 최장 그 상바이나 야차 야탐바 아니 질리 가신 데는 하마 질리도 레셔스라
Tila jirula ino domundo.
뭔가 이제 디스치라기 도스라 건다
So the time to study is when you're young. The time to train is when you're young. When you look at different topics that you can pick up when you're young, if you study a language, for example, it's much easier to study when you're young. So much harder to study language, to study writing and so forth when you're old. When our body and mind are fresh, when our body and mind are still young, we're able to study in so much more, such an effective way. When our 5 faculties are still intact, are still stable, we can study and train to such a greater degree and depth. The result of our study can be fruitful if we begin young. So if we think that I will do it later, I'm still young. When I'll turn 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, then I will practice. Then I will become a monk. Then I will become a nun. It's too late. You're lagging behind. It's too late.
진짜 야구를 하스라 야시자다 야스레니 저 안에 제디 야구 베레스 이나야 진중가를 제도바나 로션비가를 제도바나 야시자 담바더니 팬럽 자마르스 간선 럽 체존든 자마르스라 딩무여레도스 이네
Of course, Geshe says that it's kind of a bit uncomfortable to say it in our environment where most of us do it in the later stage, but really, now when you become a monastic when you're older, of course it's good to become a monastic, it's good to be a monk or nun, but then think of how much more effective you could have been had you sought ordination in really young age. You could have accomplished much more had it been done earlier on, right?
먼저 로야스는 드리장 상이 제로도스라 템벌 데이문다스 데 템벌 마데나 아니 제번 시번 갈로스 템비 제바이나 마시바데 찍바레스
We can say that the older we get, it becomes harder to study in a sense that we might study something today and tomorrow we'll forget it, right? Forgetfulness sets in. And as it is said, even if you've studied something, if you forget it, it's tantamount to not having known it to begin with. No, it's just like unknowing. Forgetting is just like unknowing.
데츠레로 빵간니 투마인 버 지시차스 데케란 진 데사레스라
Jawa de loimba.
제와 마츠와데리
Cała.
저기 로사임 로마스
Tanda shiva de loge.
치위치 레로 빵 투마인 바니 데츠레로 빵간니 투마인 지시차스 숨바데리
So again, looking at the last 2 lines in verse 7, it says, even if I were to abandon laziness then, at that improper time, what will be the use?
치웨 숨바 디체 레로 빵간니 투마인 바 베비 지시차 그거 총세 점 그거 드고 말스 대가라다 그거 드고 말스
And Geshe Dharma says too that though one may abandon laziness when one is held by death, what is striving at the wrong time supposed to accomplish? One will not achieve the slightest purpose.
Shivan debi le macheva, Lord Chivi, Lelo Mechavanis, Lord Chivi, Lelo Mechavanis.
That brings us to verse 8 that comes out of the heading of, as death will come suddenly without you having been able to do all that you want. You should not be lazy.
Lome. If the Chitan Nanzolia, Nanzola Tan Debo Mambu Yorwas, Chaji Mambu Yorwas, and in Dichi, Penatachi, and a Tambo Chansa to Jab, Tenepu, Kepu, Love, Kamba, Music, Sagic, Chashi Shavana, Aldam Chansa Maja with Shidrogame, Hakuyo Maros, or Dindi Chaji Kanji, Lengo Tsam Cheni, and Shu Maki Kong, Suzuki, Chikmi to the Mandro Kong, and Shidrong in the and Chidaki Chum Jungi, Mambushu Chagoras, Tinza, the Dindi Gichi, any Chawangi Shingi, Lelolaya, Machagua, any Giawa Jubaya, Junguris.
We have a lot of plans. We have a lot of things that we want. There's so many things that we wish for, that we expect to do. Looking at the plan that we have for life, it might be that from a young age, we think that I shall get married, I will have kids, I shall take up a mortgage, build a house, and so forth. But there's no guarantee whatsoever that we'll be able to accomplish those plans to get what we want, because death might catch up with us even before that. There's no guarantee that we will not be destroyed by death, because death can destroy or will destroy our plans. So here it says, rather than being totally attracted by and lured by ignoble activities, make sure that you cultivate virtue. Make effort in the cultivation of virtue.
Ngala Gishi di Nila Mugashira, Gishi Jingala, Kejes, Niki, Semaboro Chisra, Gishla Digi, that Jamsu Kala Dro, Yam Champion Drora, Tachik Zazan Dozo Chigila Tam, and Ichi Drogora, Shiji Langa Posuto in by Nea, and Drogora, and cut down the Dozo Pardola, Yam the Drogi Donto Chilasa, Yam Drosaki Meavasa.
Geshe was having a conversation with one of his acquaintances, another Geshe, and he says that he made that comment, and Geshe hopes that we're not going to be deflated. He made that comment that when you go down to the beach, for example, and you see how busy the beach can become, so you see a couple walking, going for a walk, even during very busy days. So they go hand in hand, or they go kind of hugging each other, they go here and there. And it says that you almost have the impression that they also think that even after death, in the intermediate state, they will remain inseparable. It might seem to be an awkward statement, but Geshe thought that that's quite a funny thing to think of, that people having that idea that even after death, they would be inseparable.
Dinza Nimanga Jagala, Modatis Janra, Modatis Jan, Lotion Gigin, Quenyam Jokotan Joiva, which was Joko Madasa, my chances in Gay.
Before coming to Australia, Geshe was practicing driving with one of his acquaintances, a young guy. And Geshe was just hooning. He was kind of driving really fast. And the other guy got really scared and said, just slow down. I haven't even made it to get married. Sorry? Yeah.
Kanjita and Emilia Chashi Shuja restaurant at the Chico, I think a kitchen was shooting in some roads in an do stay on the Egypt. It indeed was Yimbalaya, Mimam was kitchen was shoot their Joras, Kanjing Andolaya, Debbie, Chawad, Mambu shoot your day and Chawadi, Mandrum Kong, and and chiwi chidak chomdung ta chang deba yoros.
Yeah, so the point here is that we do have different plans. We have different things that are regarded as very important in our society. Many people regard those things to be really vital, and we pursue them, but then we have no guarantee that we'll actually be able to accomplish that, because death could catch up with us. The Lord of Death could catch up with us before we manage to accomplish our plans. So here it says, thinking about it, don't procrastinate. Make sure that you do make effort in cultivating virtue.
Things nganzo di myong wi ngeba zawani ni meba inza kanji nganzo chawa chik ju mazo khon nganzo le chiwa yongwa di peshe ngeba reslam chogoras tindi jinza ani re tindi jiro astara.
So what Shantideva here is encouraging us to not postpone it. After all, when we think of the way that we will die, it is likely that also we will die before being able to accomplish all our plans. There will be things that we'll not be able to complete. So don't procrastinate, don't postpone, but make sure that you cultivate virtue.
Zawen din mache tsambatang diche cheba nebala lobur chida wonindi kiu chumshi sember yurs.
Verse 8 says, when this has not been done, when this is initiated, and when this is only half done, suddenly the Lord of Death will come. And the thought will occur, oh no, I'm doomed.
Devena nyurdu chole deni mache batang chongse tsambatang chawan di chetsam cheba nebala lobur di chida wonindi gyoshen di kiu da chomshi semshi tapi gyobar gyurna gyoba kiwa gyurna di tsi shikcha tata yin gyoba tsombala gyoba chebala ya tsomba chagubres.
The commentary says, since one will die soon, this work one will leave undone or just started. The other one will leave half done. When the Lord of Death comes all at once, then regretfully one thinks, oh no, I'm doomed. When one is regretful from fear, what shall one do? Strive in virtue from right now onwards.
The Gewa la Mambem na Dungar ki Don Gewa knees. Kerang Gewa la Mambem na Dungar ki Guj Mato, Kerang Chawa Karichebaina, Dungar Guj Chabe, Dungar Gumado Shen Kaya, Chagmenza, Dungar ki Don Gujoris.
The third point under the section of abandoning laziness by reflecting on the disadvantages of it in this life is saying that you will be tormented by suffering if you do not make perseverance in virtue. In thinking that at the time of death you will be tormented with sorrow, and then if you do not pursue virtue from this moment forward, you will not accomplish what is necessary. Altogether, it says that you will be tormented by suffering if you do not make perseverance in virtue, in that if you do not make effort in virtue, it is likely that you will be accumulating causes for suffering, and therefore you will be tormented by it if you do not persevere in virtue.
Tambuchi with the Yangi Don, Yangi should give Tambaye, Mingmar Don, Chimanza, Nien du Reta Chebata, Shinji Pony Shanatas.
So when verse 9 comes under the heading of, at this time of death, you will be tormented with sorrow. Sorry. It says, their faces flowing with tears and their eyes red and swollen with sorrow. My relatives will finally lose hope, and I shall behold the faces of the messengers of Yama.
So long.
Loi.
Odirda rangandu tadani gewa chebaima tadani gewa chebaima ko gewa chiwi ta goba jogulwas mato ta chiga hamadliya chiwa todu bawa ngebare chiwi kalya ta ani ngamda da ani chi gyoba da jigdak shu jig toni ani se pyogo chombaina ani soso mase soso tigla yubi pama pinche chok chongmo samalo pedi ani semdu kani rogo chawaina in chomadas ra
So you should cultivate virtue in light of saying that at the time of death, you will be overwhelmed with misery. So we can think of what will occur to us if we do not cultivate virtue. Think that, for example, that death will happen. You will come across death all of a sudden. And not only it is possible that your mind will be gripped with fear, but also think of being surrounded by those who are dear to your heart. It might be your parents, it might be your siblings, it might be other friends or close people close to your heart. And there will also be that pain of separation, and there will be nothing that you'll be able to do, or they be able to do in order to avoid death.
re ngandu che che di suzu ngone semda zang na che che pigi ta chi pena ta thawada ani chigan da rab rawas ro odindi chi thone rowaina ani ani chi kabya pe thawan de madindi pena ro nge ngos thoya nganzu ani dun sa ro ani mora mashi ko dunta chix ji khone ya mora nge pesa kham yobati Geshe dia orang pemula cek orang lama dia orang bercerai lama seorang bercerai kan dimji tadi an tu apa cek sama suci an tanga an cekal lama tu ya kak lo boras ngal keji titi sons pe masih ba ani lo dia suci di teba tamsik tok gimba di peshi
And this is what we do in Dharma practice. If you are practicing throughout your life, of course, as a monastic, as a monk or a nun, that's excellent. But also, if you practice as a lay practitioner, part of your practices are preparation for the time of death, in which you'd be able to die with a clear mind, an open heart. So if you do it properly, if you practice the Dhamma properly throughout your life, you will be able to die with that clear and lucid mind, in the sense that, for example, last year, we've lost one of our community members, Venerable Johnsel, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And in the weeks leading up to her death, quite close to her death, she distributed the things that her possessions, the money, and so forth. So she wanted to die without thinking that there's still things that were left behind. So when she was still able to do it, she gave away part of what she had, part of the money, to her daughter, made some offering to a lamas, to his Holiness the Dalai Lama, to Lama Sopa Rinpoche, and so forth. So that, having given them away, then in a conversation with Geshe, she said that now, I don't have to worry about those things. How should I use my mind? What direction should I turn my mind to in order to prepare my mind for death? And she died, it seems, with that really open and clear state of mind. So at least Geshe thought that when we look at this manner of dying in this way, where your mind is clear, your heart is open, you have faith, you have clear samaya, good samaya with your surroundings, with those who are close to your heart, with your teachers and so forth. Certainly, your Dhamma practice influences the way that you will then die at the end of your life, and will also have an influence on the transference of death leading to next life.
자원이 통화서 미시 단지 뭐라 부모님 비어래 다 부모 샷사우시다 부모도 아마니 빼 마스거든이 참부 니오 쉬지어랬어 부모님 메서는 아마에 농대만이 생겼어 이내양 지 로범로다 지 겨버로 자원이면도 안 콘스토인 안 통마스스라 뭐 디디지 토니 안 니마타과 비 송다야 지 수사요라마데 안지 비기다 젠데 생아레 미세만 소바 안 다야 안 모랑기 티 장 마트 카둘이야 몰이야 아니 케추니 암조 녀야지 나 소로치슬라스 뭐 디디지는 존디 베 아니 김도 가보다 세간지로
Before Johnson passed away in the last couple of months leading up to her death, Geshe visited her daily, every day. And it seems that kind of the process of death, of dying, was done in with such a peaceful state of mind. Geshe can't recall her lamenting or approaching death with a sorrowful mind, not her. And also Lani was around, her daughter. They had a very close bond between them. Lani said that she can't remember even a single occasion in which she was upset with her mom or angry at her mom. So Lani was here. She was also supportive of her mom leading up to death. And Geshe looked at that process. I thought this is kind of quite a remarkable way of dying, where you die with a clear mind. You have kept your connections pure and well with your teachers. You've made offerings to your teachers. You have faith and so forth. It is, Geshe feels, at least, of course, it's impossible to know how was it here, how was it for Johnson, in her mind, but still looking at how she interacted with others, how she spoke about things, it seems that the practice that she had, faith that she had and so forth, had such a remarkable influence over the way that she died.
Di kanji gyo majina di namala thumai bachi vi nyanging gishu gitami mig marwata don chiman sabata jawati chiwar shini nyedu reta chabata rayan jigjin shinji poni don tashi gobe ani tan gyobe gyoba thakbu ton chigoej chana ani yagum doas gyoba maybe ton chi droech Sina Gavioras, di Gaviovana, and a Gavachos, so there is God.
The commentary says, at the time of one's untimely death, near and dear ones, with swollen red eyes due to misery and tears running down their faces, lose hope. And one, through being afraid, will have to look into the faces of a lot of death messengers. So it's not that there's nothing that can be done. If you can still practice the Dharma, you can still accustom your mind with the cultivation of virtue. No.
Sorry.
So there are a couple of questions here. It says, if one meditates on death, especially the process of dying, what are the key elements to meditate upon? Dila peshes chua tiende chua mitapa gomrim gomtande peshes dashing yomare dila kesi chia mitapa gombaina mixegi chigalamola gom khare kandechi gyagugres nenga cho karinas chia mitapa gombaina nenga so keche shudi khare gongogres samro khare gongogres ani mixegi chidoina chigalamola Ninga cheshu kare gongules.
지장 치가 나오는데 검자 세디 아니 치다르스
Yeah.
저 딜라 송도스
Well, first off, if you begin your meditation when the process of dying has already started, it's too late.
균딩게 치오면 다고 세디 먼저 메다바디 아니 칸 시에데모도 샘라야지 메다바랴 상기 아니 상로 지 균딩게 용금도스 티마운데 다디 용야치 소야디 베키침부레샤스 디 용야 소야라야 안가주 두스 마 데비 카브들이 소소 카왈 데바이니야 안 디네캅소 가르 통바이니야 가르 템바이니야 아니 처음부터 공에 검수지 연구여라서 배는 두스 데들이 배는 남식 돌이야 상무시 담아야 남식인 주도슈 저거라서 그 아니 교도야디 깨지는 교도야지 남식 돌아래 아니 쿠유 돌아래 이야디 군두 비게 아니 지 신다 메돌로 소베 요르 참로 유도비어 바티 아니 샘나와지 공바이나 요 아니 로레 양참바듯이 연구도스 아니 디니 소수 류토레 소수 칠레 예비지 아니 메다 심전을 소비 내다 두 유도야 아니 지 치도야 이 간절질에 소수 토레 바웨 딘디도지 균딩 삼노지여바나 아니 치오마다 왔으니디 아니 피기래야 깨지시기디 지달랑 소리지 많이 봐 대응 뭐만 임바디 아니 샘나 소투사레스라
Since meditating on it only at the time of death or when dying is too late, we should do that meditation on death and impermanence regularly, on a regular basis, daily. Like, for example, now, when we think of death and impermanence, we think of different events that occur to us every day. In whatever we do, whatever we think daily, we need to incorporate to that the thought of death and impermanence. To think of impermanence, for example, in terms of the transition that occurs in a daily basis, even as far as just looking at the weather patterns and so forth. The weather changes, the climate changes. It changes from moment to moment. There are constant changes that are happening from moment to moment. The passing of seasons, the forests, the flowers, the plants, and so forth. Think of how there is that constant process of change that occurs from moment to moment. But not only that, think of those who are close to your heart, your relatives, friends, and so forth. They also not only change from moment to moment, but they also go through the process of death and dying. So when you then think about it in terms of death and impermanence on a daily basis, you're not just kind of saying death and impermanence, but in your heart or in your mind, you come to see that this is actual reality, that constant change, impermanent change from moment to moment, and also recognizing that all of us are subject to death. This is the way that you acquaint your mind with death and impermanence.
체갈라마들이야 안땅아 아니 쇼토 바바레 samsung samlo지 네 강가레 용해지려서 samlo지 여바나 아니 지다 라 아니 지다 뇽도와서레스 단 지다 뇽바이나 아니 플럼 지갸바이나야 아니 플럼 슈치부치 아니 라 야투야치 딜리 용구여서레스 라다.
So then when you acquaint your mind daily with that recollection of death and impermanence, at a time in which the time of death will come, it is likely that your mind will be less gripped by fear. Fear, anxiety will be much weaker. And whatever you do, even in terms of the aspirations that you do, could become more powerful.
Yeah. Is the reason in this life, in this experience, in this life, in this body, that we avoid pain and suffering?
That we
avoid pain and suffering, we experience pain and suffering, we avoid it. This is what experience where there wasn't a pain and suffering. So now we're yearning to experience what we've experienced prior. Does that make sense?
So you're asking, is the reason that in this life we're trying to avoid suffering, to avoid pain, is that, sorry?
Is the reason that we're doing that because...
Yeah, it's the reason that we're doing that is because we had before in the past life experiences in which we didn't have that.
And we've had this experience of like, I don't know, enlightenment. It's like, I don't have the words. It's like we're yearning to experience what we already experienced, which is void. So happiness.
Dila Quran chiwa descansare di denda ucciso. Dila maso se dila dunge ne natsa dila sopa magama se di kanto du zemtap chigirwa katap chigirwa ta di gyumsen kare min tola sanu tawa inarwa halam natso kewa ngamarwa kewa ngama bagap chila ne nata chia meba dende nyobache khan chena yawochi dewachi laga yawochi chu nyangyon dende chiksawaina dila tenetse dila tunge yongi mare mayona natsa mayona kangi matena dende sanochi yongerbes.
Tadi tanju shona sta chidang anzugi sem gi ranshin roch mansu ranshin lingi roch deva da dungam deva di redos ra.
Well, rather than thinking of experiences that we have in past lifetimes, Geshe reckons that we can just recognize how all of our minds act in a similar way, in that naturally or innately we have that wish to be well, to be happy, and not to avoid suffering. Something that occurs for everyone. The wish to be well, to have pleasure, or to have happiness, and not to experience pain.
Tianzu di nganzu sem di chima da charong inza dungar gi tsawa chagdang monsong ga sem da charong inza ani res labna digmendos rani yagu chamasong.
But the nature of the mind is luminosity. It's clear light. Stains, anger, attachments, and so forth are adventitious. That are not anger, attachment, and so forth are not ingrained within the nature of the mind. And therefore, it is possible to separate or to liberate the mind from those afflictive states of mind. And Geshe reckons that because it is possible to do it, also that wish to be happy, that wish to be well, the wish to not experience suffering also occurs. Dila chio kensa di tamala bishain. Dila kalla gyoresena dila pemaman chio shasagires. Ni ta shasewaina ni semchen tundu di se gogirwas. Ni peba velogyu dila semche se gi tikpa di kanche chavres.
Shasana simjin sego machaps. Simjin pigile shide you Roma
So Graham is asking, most Tibetans eat meat because of the very cold climate in Tibet. How do Tibetans overcome the bad karma they generate by killing animals for food? Well, Geshe says that if you eat meat, you don't necessarily have to kill an animal for that. You can eat the flesh of an animal that has died naturally. I'm rolling my inner eyes. Anyway, Geshe here is picking up a debate with you, Graham. It says that kind of if you say that since Tibetans eat meat, they kill animals, well, there's no pervasion here. Pervasion.
Digbati Sokjuk Digbarang res. Tinga Pebayi, Sokjuk Digbayomare, and Kana Nushavare, Sokjuk Digbayomar, Sesayomares, Digbarang res.
I haven't said that. Geshe said, of course, there is a negativity that is involved with the act of killing. So Geshe is not saying that, since I'm Tibetan and this is what we do, then there's no negativity in that. Of course, there is a negativity in that. It's not that for us in this place and this culture and for Tibetan, it would be different. It's not that they do not have negativities and we have negativities. It's not like that. Of course, killing another living being is a negative action.
Tanganzogi Nanzumalam Jagoras, Tanga Puro. Pujigi Mitsamalo Pula Yoshos Lavena. Mamushu Trolangaros. A Pomujiki Mitsaman Pomujosolana. Pumamuj now Dromaros. In a Tama Dendro like Yoshos said, Moyonus Redos. Dendro Kiel Gagoras. Tundruli Tundri Kiwali touch in me Kiwaji Lambaina. Peshi Gagaros. Did that and Digba ready in ya. Digba ready in ya. Tundruli Tundri Kiwa Zocheni. Dendrojil Kioslan, one of the Janisha Sagi over Peva Jacha Gupchuk to the Chigoresta.
So then in terms of the aspiration stuff we make, now we say we do aspirational prayers. So if you're a guy, for example, if you're a man, if you say, may everyone be born again as men, not everyone is going to be happy with that. Or if you're a woman and you in your aspiration, you think, may everyone be born as a woman, there's some other people that would be unhappy with that. So rather than saying that, may everyone be born as men, may everyone be born as women, if we think that's just in general, may everyone avoid a miserable rebirth, may everyone avoid, and may everyone attain a pleasant state of existence, a good state of existence. That's kind of a common positive prayer to be done. And Geshe says that in Tibetan culture, even those that eat meat, quite used to regularly saying those prayers, making such aspirations. So for example, may living beings be able to live or to escape being born as an animal, because we know that this is a type of birth that is involved with a greater degree of suffering. May they be able to avoid that birth and be born in a better state of existence, in a pleasant state of existence. So even if when you have meat, you'll still have that consideration, that aspiration for others.
Then Nijuda Shasai the Yaburis love metas. Zawini Shasai the Yabu Meva Tunguyos. In that, Chik Pebamambu Shasagi or D. Kandash Sagi Yumetolayang, get this Chiksini Trosra. Manzu Pebagi, Pebamang Chiagi, and Nanzuto and Rohbares. And it's so soon with Suja with Simjendi and Kaukalaya, Simjekai, Simjen Res Sechin, and Disha Sagores. This save Kablaya, and Peggy, Travagio and Delaya Pilaya, Munam Denjun Shagatanganzo, Kalabi, Dangachunjukolaya, Munam Denju Shagata, Pekali, that the Munam Dengo and the Kashan Seva and Samgira, Munam Denjuris. That dear Simjen di Yobo Shejik. Yobo Shag Tabs any questions of Jilaya, any Mulum de Sama Mulum Denshin, Shat Sagores. Then need the bar tonsons, then the Udrodin and tonsons. And Chu came Melang in Sogi, Simjin Satanti, but massive Shanatsa. Gata Mambo Pilaya, Chusachi, Chuchi, and Kambalaya, P. Lock Tenchi, and Kit Domini, Cha Mazovadi, So Chemato. Shatzama charge. Tindichi, Tindizao in Chimaris. Chimaris that. Keva did those that.
Geshe grew up in a nomadic community. And as nomads, you keep herd animals. And every once in a while, you kill one of the animals in order to eat meat. And Geshe is not saying that there's no negativity in that. Of course, there is negativity in killing another animal, but Geshe remembers that the way that it was done when he grew up in Tibet was that when the family decides to kill one of the yaks or what have you in order to have meat, you call a monk and to be present and say prayers when that is being done, so that may death will come quickly and may also that animal attain a better state of rebirth in the next life. And Geshe said that he also had to do it. It's pretty difficult, it's really hard emotionally to do it. But this is the type of consideration or attitude that you have living in a nomadic community. Now, of course, here when we look at meat eating in this environment, in this culture, in our current day and age, we have industrial, how do you call them? The meat industry becomes a big industry. So the way that animals were killed in Tibet for food is quite different to the way that animals are being killed here, in the sense that when they're growing up in that meat industry. And also it seems that when you look at some clips that come up from some meat factories, some butcheries and so forth, of the way that animals die, being left to bleed to death or being shocked to death and so forth. Geshe reckons that altogether it seems that this way of dying is more cruel or more painful than how the environment that Geshe came from. In some sense, it's more upsetting than what Geshe remembers from his time in Tibet.
Just one little comment. Today's Thanksgiving Day in America, where many turkeys are dying, being slaughtered and ones that was killed, missing from their community for the place.
Dili arigi duchenji rwa, duchen dila chade mambo segirwa. So de chedu kunto chedu sobore bo chedirin dimbolan kyanas chimagidosa.
Tata yini tengan tanda dinda gondan dinda kalyani kens samlena angan mulong den choros right.
So Venerable Chökyi said that today Thanksgiving in the US, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche made a request to send some prayers for the sake of the many turkeys that will lose their life today. So of course we can do that, and we also have a teaching session tonight, so we can also dedicate at the end of the day all of our activities for the sake of those turkeys. No.
I wanted to ask, as a lay person in the community, what would Geshe say is the most purposeful Dharma practice for?
So for a layperson, in lay community, not here in the center, but out there, what's the most purposeful Dharma practice that you could have? Since the Mikyang Bala, the Chuzo Dila Madewa Che Chil Digero, since me Chizola Dewaina, Chu Nyamlen Chewaina, Chu Nyamlen Tunta Yakshu Sas Cheshu Karinas.
The Yakshudi Pigi Magichugongi Sutram Song the Tony and Chambadi Ninji and come to Vana. The Yakshu Diredas Ra Tigi and Sozolaya Ishidi Teva and Yankurki and Kim Zang Zoyanaya, Dig Pemba, and Lomba Namaya Dig Pemba, and Suzu Kaudranaya, and Mikawa Yonyachi, and Di Chagwas race, Di Yakshu races.
Geshe reckons that the most purposeful practice as a lay practitioner, wherever you are, is to try to take up the ethical discipline that abstains from the 10 non-virtue, and to practice that ethical discipline as much as you can with the motivation of loving kindness and compassion for others. It will bring a sense of peace and well-being to oneself, but also it has a far-reaching influence on your surrounding, your family, the people in your surrounding. And it also, you can say that it creates ripples in our society, affecting the place that we live, the country, and so forth. So as such, Geshe feels that maintaining that ethics in which you abstain from non-virtues with the motivation of loving kindness and compassion is the most important or purposeful practice that you can have. So thank you. Let's leave it here for now. I'll put the prayers on the screen. and we can and lead all transmigratory beings without exception to that state. May the precious supreme bodhicitta not yet born arise, and may that arisen not decline, but increase more and more. In this land encircled by snowy mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. You uphold the subduous moral way, yourselves the bountiful bearer of all. Sustaining, preserving, and spreading Majunnath's victorious doctrine, O mercifully accomplish His magnificent praise, honoring the three jewels. Protector of myself and others, your disciples, please live long.
Thank you. Geshe, Shane. It's
Okay.
okay.
Maybe.
Ganding of Church.
Okay.
Chiki la gore.